Hey, welcome back to another edition of the Friday Show. And we are doing this show live this week. We're doing something a little bit different. Pleased to be joined by Editor-in-Chief Natalie Voss of the Pollock Report and by Andrew Cohen, legal analyst, lawyer, standardbred owner and breeder, and currently the senior editor of the Marshall Project. Welcome to the Friday Show, Andrew.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, we're here to talk a little bit about some legal issues in horse racing. Let's go back to March of 2020. I believe it was a Monday morning, and my phone started blowing up very early that there were people being let out of the back stretches at several tracks in handcuffs, charged later with drug adulteration, misbranding. Andrew, let's go back to that. What do you remember? What was your reaction that day when the indictments started rolling out?
You know, my reaction back then was twofold. First, there was this notion that it was the tip of the iceberg, and you wondered if this was the first wave, when the second wave was going to come. We had been told, guided, if you will, that there were going to be some indictments, that there was going to be some stuff that was going down. The second thing I thought about was how fortunate it was, in a sense, for horse racing, both on the thoroughbred side and the standardbred side, that this bombshell of allegations about horse doping was going to come out just as the country was starting to reel from the coronavirus. And I think in 2 years, with 2 years of benefit hindsight, you can look back and say, geez, you're right. This story would have been a much more significant story 2 years ago and last year, and even now, had it unfolded without the pandemic occurring as well. So in that sense, I think horse racing on both sides, thoroughbreds and standardbreds, got lucky in the timing of it. And obviously, the pandemic has delayed, I think, resolution of some of these cases. It's certainly delayed hearings. It's delayed trials. So the process, which is usually slow, especially in federal court, has been even slower than that. So those were my initial reactions.
Yeah, I can just remember having printed out the indictments, because of course there were multiple indictments that were all kind of related to each other, and just having like sort of stacks of paper around my desk and kind of throwing things around, just trying to figure out what was going on. I thought that was going to be the craziest day of the week, and then I think it was a couple of days later that we started getting cancellations due to COVID. So it just kept getting stranger.
So we've had the first trial. Dr. Seth Fishman was found guilty, and he's yet to be sentenced, but faces up to 20 years. We've had a number of guilty pleas. There's still some cases to come, including Jason Service. From the standardbred side, Andrew, what are the cases that, I don't want to say intrigue you the most, but that you're kind of looking forward to hearing what the evidence is and how the government plans to prosecute?
Yeah, I mean, there are some very prominent trainers who have been identified. Chris Oakes is one. Richard Banca is another. As part of the Fishman trial, there was really an interesting testimony from a man named Ross Cohn, no relation to me, who was a trainer a little bit of time ago, who said not only was he involved in the doping scheme that Dr. Fishman's been convicted of, but also says that he was fixing races at some point. We don't know many details about that. There's been testimony from Adrian Hall, who is a relatively minor trainer, who was also one of Dr. Fishman's clients. She essentially came forward and became a very important government witness to say, this is how the scheme worked. So, I think whether you're on the thoroughbred side or the standardbred side, you hear things, right? You hear rumors, you hear innuendo, you see examples that make you scratch your head about certain trainers who come out of nowhere and suddenly have, for a stretch, the inability to lose races. And you wonder what's going on. You wonder what magic bullet they found and whether it's legal or not. Some of those names, I think, have been identified. Some of those people have been charged. I imagine some are going to plead guilty at some point. Some may go to trial. The other thing you watch for, at least on the standardbred side, is those people who you have suspicions about, and who the industry has suspicions about, who have not yet been named. You wonder, are they cooperating? Have they been exonerated? And hopefully there's going to be some clarity as this first wave of trials moves past.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've certainly gotten theories submitted to us by people who think they know, who's going to be on any subsequent waves of indictments. And I swear, everybody who has ever been a licensed trainer in North America has at some point been in an email or a text message or something sent to us. Oh, I'm so sure this is going to be the next guy. So I'm very curious to see if there is another wave or not. I think every few weeks we also get told by somebody with great authority, oh, yes, there's one coming. And here we are. So is it unusual in your experience, Andrew, in federal cases like this, for there to sort of be unrolling waves of indictments? When they say, oh, there's still going to be more, and it's been 2 years since the first ones, or almost 2 years, is it conceivable that there could still be more, or is that not usually how these things play out? Do they usually just sort of round up all the evidence they've got and throw it at the court all at once?
Yeah, I think no. Usually you see rolling indictments, and it all depends on how much of a priority the Justice Department has made of this scenario, of these cases, of this controversy, of this scandal. I don't want to make this analogy lightly because there's a lot of holes in it. But look at the way federal prosecutors are unrolling the Capitol riot and insurrection stuff, right? That's something, it's now 13 months old. They started with the very low level people, and you saw a bunch of plea deals, and you see more and more of these cases and more indictments, and people are getting arrested even now, a year later, and their feds are slowly working their way up the ladder. That's consistent with federal practice when it comes to organized crime, right? You start with the lower people and you begin to build your base with guilty pleas and with convictions and so forth. And then you sort of take aim at some of the higher level people. That's going to happen with respect to what happened in Washington in January of 2021. That's already happening. Whether it happens with horse racing, I think, is still an open question. And I think it's an open question because I'm not sure that there is as much of a priority at the Justice Department today as there might have been 2 years ago to pursue this. I don't know that for a fact, but you wonder how much resources are the feds going to really put into really climbing up this ladder? How much do they want to do? And I guess the wild card here is there some belief at the Justice Department that maybe they're going to do what they can do and then hope that the new federal legislation that is supposed to be implemented soon is somehow going to take over and begin to work on some of this stuff as well. So that to me is a wild card, if you will. But no, what we're seeing in these horse cases, the guilty pleas, the using of government witnesses to get at people who they think are maybe more involved, that's pretty standard stuff. And so far it's been very successful.
Yeah, in the back of my mind, I keep wondering what's motivating the government to do this. These are crimes, and there's different levels of it. The public is being cheated. The other horse owners and trainers are being cheated when someone is using performance enhancing drugs. But it's not exactly. It can't be a high priority. Although, doesn't the Southern District have a separate unit that just looks at sports?
I think so. And listen, these feds, both the FBI agents and the federal prosecutors, they're involved in this. I mean, these are not easy cases. These are complex cases. To talk about the FDA and to talk about adulterated drugs and to explain to lay people who are jurors, essentially, how it all unfolds and stuff, these are not easy cases. Anytime you have medicine, whether it's veterinary medicine or any kind of medicine, you're going to have complexity. I think the feds did a really good job in the Fishman case of making it simple for people to understand what was happening, why it was illegal, and who should have been held responsible for it. But you're right, Ray. And in a perfect world, right, state racing commissions would have the authority, they'd have the incentive, they would have the manpower to handle this stuff. They would be the ones catching people who are cheating. They would be the ones processing this stuff in state courts, and there would be a faster turnaround, if you will. But that hasn't happened. It's not likely to happen, and it's certainly not going to happen if the federal legislation passes. It'll be passed on to the feds, and you hope that the federal regulators will have enough jam to get in sync with the Justice Department to prosecute these cases as they arise under HISA.
I think you've identified the problem. The state racing commissions, they had the they have the ability, but do they have the will to do it? Natalie?
I mean, I think they would probably tell you that they don't have the power to wiretap somebody's phone, and that was a lot of how they caught these guys. But whether that's the only explanation for why there's not more, resources devoted to investigators and boots on the ground kinds of things in all jurisdictions, I don't think that's the only reason that we don't see more of that.
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting is I think the Fishman case, and I think all of this stuff is an indictment against state racing commissions, right? It's further proof, as if we need any, that the current model, the past model, just didn't work. So I don't know that there's been any polling done, but I would imagine that support for the new federal law has increased as people have become aware of how hapless the state regulators are. It wasn't the state regulators who caught Fishman, right? It was boots on the ground law enforcement stuff. And even though state racing commissions may say we can't wiretap, state police can, right? Police can wiretap. You can go, and you don't have to be a federal law enforcement official to try to get access to that. So there are ways to do it, but there simply isn't the political will, and I don't think there ever will be.
Speaking of wiretaps, we've had a lot of questions from readers through the couple of years of this case of people saying, well, so are there wiretaps between these two people? Is this mentioned in wiretaps? And I always have to sort of go back to look, what I know. I've published what I can from what's in the public facing file. But there's a lot of stuff that's still under seal in the various files for the various defendants. And I don't really have a barometer on how normal that is. I know there's a lot of different reasons something might be sealed. If there are concerns about there being personal contact information or medical information in a file, then it's going to be under seal. And that doesn't have a lot to do with, it being really bombshell kind of evidence. There's also situations where they might seal a transcript so that both parties have a chance to review it before it becomes public. But I don't know, is the fact that there are still a lot of things under seal in your experience an indicator that there are a lot of unindicted co-defendants or cooperating witnesses, or could there be so many different possible reasons for that it's really not an indicator of anything juicy that's hiding in there?
That's a great question. I think there's a couple of things. First of all, the trend has been towards secrecy. So there's been more and more sealing of documents in every context. As prosecutors and defense attorneys, when they both have an incentive to seal and they come to the judge and say, hey, judge, for once, we agree on something, and that's to keep everything sealed. Judges usually are willing to accede to that, putting public interest sort of on the back burner. So that's a trend that transcends this case or these series of cases. I think the reason we haven't had as much stuff unsealed, because, of course, horses don't have HIPAA rights, is because the feds do want to use this stuff in other cases. They do feel like they need to keep their cards close to the vest because there are going to be other prosecutions down the road. Now, some of these prosecutions may be for people we already know about, right? There's a backlog of cases, and some are not all of them are going to plead out. But the fact that they're keeping it so closely held, to me, suggests that we're just in the relatively early stages of a bigger story about this stuff. And that I really do think that there are going to be more people. There have to be. There have to be more people involved. It can't just be a Ross Cohen or an Adrian Hall, for example, two witnesses against Fishman. There are other people, and it'll be interesting to see as these cases progress, whether new people are added, whether new information comes up, and how embarrassing it actually is. These are unknown questions as we go forward.
We have a reader question here from YouTube. I think this is probably directed at Andrew. What has the reaction been from the standardbred community after the list of Fishman clients was released and included so many members of the standardbred industry?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, and I'm glad to answer it. So, the list comes out, right? First of all, people realize there is a list, and everybody's wondering, well, who's on the list? And the list comes out, I guess, Friday, right? Ray, is that when you guys publish the Was it
last
Friday?
week, Thursday or Friday. Yeah.
Thursday or Friday. So the list comes out, and in a novel, if you're writing this, right, it would be this short list of people, and everybody would say, oh my God, here's the smoking gun, here are the 10 people we've all suspected, and they're all bad guys, and they're all and wow, this is it, and this is the roadmap for what's going to happen next, because if you're on this list, the feds are likely looking at you. That's not what happened, right? So there were 200 names on the list, including people who in harness racing are among the most established and beyond reproach people you can imagine. I'm not going to name them here, but one of them is my trainer. So she calls me when her name is on the list, and she says, the bad news is my name's on the list. The good news is the zip code for me that's on the list is 17 years old. I have not had any contact in 17 years. And that's, there's dead people on the list. There's people that go back a long way. So in some ways, the fact that the list was so extensive and included so many people who have such high reputations within harness racing, it sort of detracted from the power of the list. It made people skeptical that, of the names, of the allegations against the names on it. And I think it's going to be interesting to see how it is all explained. Fishman, it seems to me, could not have only been doing illegal things over the course of his veterinary career. It seems to me he was doing legal things as well. Some people will be able to come forward if they have to and say, yeah, he did some blood gas work for me. I had a horse that I thought tied up, and Fishman was providing that service, and I wanted to know if my horse had a blood problem, so I used that. There may be other explanations as well, but I don't think the list had the power, the negative power that a lot of people thought. And I think it raises as many questions as it answers, right? I mean, there are few thoroughbred people on the list, which makes you think there's another list somewhere that the feds are keeping sealed because they want to use it in future cases. So that was the reaction. The reaction was people were angry. People who were on the list were angry, thinking that they had somehow been, maligned by having their names on it. But I think the general sense was the list seems so flawed that it doesn't really indict people, implicate people is a better word, than people thought it would.
Yeah, we had several people call and say, that they used Equistology's services, which is the company that Fishman owned, for a water treadmill or for ulcer medication, that sort of thing. So we know that there are some bad people on the list because the people who have been either indicted or convicted are on the list. And we know that there's a lot of people that are just buying legitimate products or services. So the list does not suggest wrongdoing at all. But it is an interesting thing to look at. I wanted to get back to what you're talking about with the racing commissions and the current oversight, which in some ways also includes the U.S. Trotting Association. I'm not sure exactly what they're capable of doing in terms of investigations or, sanctions, but they're against the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority. They seem to think that everything is okay. That's what I don't get about the USTA.
Yeah, I don't get it either. Thank you for that question. I mean, it's been something we've been fighting for a year now. So the USTA is sort of like the Jockey Club. It's the industry group that it licenses you, and it's the breed registry, and it does a lot of really wonderful things. It's our database when you want to know if your horse is racing, when you want to know what the stats are. There's a lot of wonderful things that the USTA does. It's currently led by two people, including the owner of the largest breeding operation in the sport, Hanover Shoe Farms, Russell Williams, and Joe Feraldo, who is also the head of the New York Horsemen's Association, Standardbred Horsemen's Association. So I have two people who have, I think, inherent conflicts in their jobs, and they're at the top of the USTA, and they have been adamant that the federal legislation is the wrong way to go, that there is no need for a federal to bring the feds in, and that the problem of integrity, to the extent that there is a problem with integrity, in racing can be solved by buttressing state racing commissions. To me, that's a ludicrous position to take at this point in the game. And a lot of people within harness racing, including a lot of very prominent owners and breeders and trainers and drivers, agree with me and have been trying to sort of coax the USTA into a position of negotiation with the authority, the HISA authority, to see what's going to happen when the law gets up and running and how it's going to affect standardbreds. The questions that standardbred people have is, well, wait a minute, we're not like thoroughbreds. We don't have as many breakdowns of horses as thoroughbreds do. We shouldn't be required to have thoroughbred rules. The fact of the matter is, right now, standardbreds do have a lot of the same rules that thoroughbreds have when it comes to medicine and medications. A lot of the withdrawal times and so forth are the same already. And there's been no great controversy over that. Another thing is cost. Well, standardbreds race more often than thoroughbreds. You could have a standardbred horse that can race 25, 30 times a year if it's an older horse. And so the question is, who's going to pay for Travis Tigard, for example, and the USADA folks? Are standardbred people going to have to pay more than thoroughbreds? That's been debunked. So there really aren't very many good arguments against the federal legislation, and the USTA is relying on some pretty bad ones, and it's putting its money where its mouth is. It is part of a lawsuit, I think in Oklahoma, challenging the federal law, trying to get an injunction to stop the federal law from going into effect. I think we're going to get a ruling in that case. This is a motion to dismiss. So these folks, the USTA and some other racing entities have challenged the law, and they've asked a judge to basically stop it. That decision, I would imagine, is going to come down in the next couple of months. If it's in favor of the federal legislation, if it allows HISA to go forward pending a trial, that would be good news for the feds. It would be good news for those of us who support it. If, on the other hand, the judge blocks that law from going into effect for a year or two, that basically ends the process for a while. And I think that would be a big blow to racing integrity efforts.
Did the opponents of HISA cherry pick where they filed the suits? Is there like judge shopping where you kind of go around the country and you say, I think we have a better chance in the Western District of Texas or the Oklahoma than we would in New Jersey?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't know for sure. Judge shopping is a big thing. It's a big thing across the country. We see it on a political level. We see it in a lot of these immigration cases. We're seeing it in the mandate, vaccine mandate cases where there are plenty of judges out there who are very sympathetic to one cause or another, and you can pretty much evaluate who they are and you go to them. I don't know that that's happened here. And I don't know that this is the kind of case where the politics of judging are going to apply. That's not an artful way of saying it, but this is not an ideological case. So let's say, for example, you presume that a conservative judge is going to be more likely to say, no, I don't want federal oversight. I'm not in favor of more federal involvement in things, right? That would be a reasonable thing for a conservative judge to think. Right. So that would help the USTA in its argument and those who are challenging the federal law. On the other hand, conservative judges also are going to say, Congress still gets the presumption of the benefit of the doubt here, and the presumption of legality in all legislation. And if the feds think that this is a problem and the feds have a reasonable approach to it, we're going to defer a little bit to Congress, and we're going to allow this law at least to go into effect while we figure out whether it's got problems or not. So it cuts both ways. And I just don't know enough about the judge who's involved at this level, the trial judge, to evaluate what's going to happen. The presumption always is injunctions against laws like this are going to fail. Attempts to enjoin laws like this fail. Judges are willing to let the laws go into effect and have the trial. And if something happens, if the trial turns out to prove that the law is wrong or misapplied, then the remedy comes at the later point. That would still be the way I would bet, but until the judge rules, we just don't know.
Sort of going back a space to the USTA's, viewpoint on integrity issues. I remember there being a movement by, I think it was Russell Williams who put forth like the fund for, I'm going to commit X number of dollars to having towards investigations and hiring people and all that. I could ask him, and I need to just ask him. I just keep forgetting. Was there anything that was really sort of widely publicized in the standardbred world that came out of that, or what's kind of the status on that as far as you know?
Yeah, well, there was like a standardbred racing integrity fund that the USTA wanted to help fund, and Hanover Shoe was going to be a part of that. And the idea was, the slogan to that is, if you see something, say something. And the idea was, hey, folks, one of the ways we can improve racing integrity is to encourage people who see the kind of stuff that Dr. Fishman was doing to come forward and say, here's what I'm seeing. There's got to be something to it, and then have it turned over to authorities. That has been met with quite a bit of skepticism, I would say, within harness racing, for a couple of reasons. One is the messenger doesn't have a lot of credibility when it comes to that kind of stuff, because of opposition to HISA. And also, I think harness racing, like so many people within the thoroughbred sport, just aren't sold on the ability of state racing commissioners and state racing authorities to do anything with this information. They don't seem to be able to catch the doping as it's happening. One of the things I was struck by the Fishman trial and the testimony in it was how confident these guys were that they weren't going to get caught, right? How confident they were that the drugs they were using was not going to come up in a test, a post-race test, or however the testing is done. That's not unusual, right? It always seems like the cheaters in doping are ahead of the authorities. But it's one of the arguments that Travis Tigert has made when he was pitching USADA. Look, we know we're always going to be behind the eight ball when it comes to testing. We have to figure out more creative ways, more traditional law enforcement ways of getting information that's incriminating against people who have incriminated themselves. So far, I don't think that effort has been very successful. And I don't want to be too critical. I mean, I think on some level, Russell Williams really does want to improve the sport. He's clearly invested a lot. Hanover Shoe Farms is a really first-rate operation. So there's ground there to build on, but the USTA has gone off in a different direction, and there is an internal struggle within harness racing between it and these people, hundreds of them, who basically signed a letter and said, we don't want you to sue to stop the law. We want you to negotiate with HISA to see what deal you can come up with for the standardbred people so we can move forward. That's a conflict that has not yet been resolved.
Well, this is interesting analysis, Andrew. We really appreciate you joining us on the Friday show this week, and there will be plenty more in these cases going forward. Natalie, you have your calendar with all sorts of dates. What's up next in terms of court appearances or just some of these events in these cases?
I think that we have sentencing coming up in February still. As far as I know, the Marco Sulueta sentencing is later this month. I don't know if they've pushed that. Chris Oakes was supposed to have been sentenced, I think, this week, and that's been pushed to early March. The next trial date that we're aware of is that I think tentatively, I believe it's either March 23rd or March 25th. We'd have the Group 2 defendants, which is really just one now, in Rick Dane from that largest indictment. Jason Service and a couple of the other remaining ones are in Group 3, and we don't have a date yet for Group 3. So assuming that there is no plea change, that will be the next trial. And also at some point, Lisa Gianelli's trial will have to be rescheduled, and they have not yet figured out when they're going to do that.
Yeah, her trial was declared a mistrial because her attorney contracted COVID during the trial. Well, Andrew, I hope you'll join us again, because as Natalie pointed out, there's a lot yet to be unfolding here with these indictments and trials coming up.
I'll be here. We were just talking. There was an order on a motion to dismiss in the Grasso case that has come down recently, where the judge basically said, we're not going to dismiss the indictment, but we're going to make federal prosecutors explain themselves a little bit more, provide a little bit more detail, which is going to back up that case a week or two.
Fun.
That's interesting. Yeah. Well, Andrew, thanks again.
Sure.
And thanks for joining us this week
Sure.
on The Friday Show. We'll see you next week.